We're back out here once again, and today we're talking about the very best places to find those big female bass during the spawn. And spoiler alert, it's not on bed. Stick around, we're going to talk all about it. Oh, there we go, that's a good one. That's a good one. Another one on, ooh boy, look at this tank. And here is this video's featured comment. Congratulations! If you would like to have a chance to have your comment featured in an upcoming video, all you've got to do is leave a comment. And now, on with the video. Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing, and here in South Mississippi, the spawn has reached its peak. It's crested, and we're actually on the back side as it starts to wind down. By the end of March, it will be completely done and over for the rest of this year. While the rest of the country, well, you guys are just now getting into the early pre-spawn. Places like Indiana, Pennsylvania, Ohio, I'm hearing that the water's warming up, that you've topped 50 degrees in a lot of instances, and those bass have pushed up shallow and have begun feeding up after a long winter, after being up under the ice for so long. And they're feeding up on shad, shiner, bluegill, craw, or whatever prey species is in your particular fishery. Now, this time of year is not just appealing because of how many bass you can catch, but because this is a great time of year that you can actually catch your PB. Those females are loaded with eggs. They are huge. They're sometimes 2 or 3 pounds heavier than they normally would be if they're a big enough bass. But when we go chasing for those big bass, when we go chasing for those big girls, especially in the spawn, well, what do? Well, we go out and we start fishing beds because we think that's where those big girls are going to be. And sometimes, yes, you can find some really big bass on those beds. But a lot of times, well, it's a swing and a miss. And I know what you're saying. Some of you are undoubtedly going to tell me, Lowbrow, I caught my PB bass off of a bed. I caught a 9-pound, 10-pound, 14-pound bass bed fishing in the spawn, and that's when I caught my PB. So you know what you're talking about. That is the exception rather than the norm. Let me explain. See, when we go out onto the water and we start fishing for those beds, well, how many buck males do we have to wade through? Dink after dink after dink, because that seems like all we're catching, especially if you move into the late part of the spawn. By the midway through or the late part of the spawn, those females are completely done and they are off bed. So you spend an hour, 45 minutes or whatever trying to get that bass to get your bait good enough where you can hook it and then bring it into the boat, and you end up catching a 3/4 pound dink and you feel nothing but frustrated. You're happy you caught a fish, but you just wish it was a big female, and that big female's not there. So if they're not on bed, where is a better chance to catch them? Well, let's go to Google Earth. Let's take a look at the down imaging right here of the big lake, and you can see as those bass move up into the pockets, they do it in several phases. The little males, they move back into the pockets, they prepare the beds, they get them ready, and we've seen this, right? We've seen those buck males when we've caught them in the early part of the spawn. They've got that bright red lipstick, and they've got that bloody tail. Now, after those males have got those beds established, here come the females. But the problem is there's more males than there are females. So not every male is going to get a chance to mate. They're not going to get a chance to continue the species with the female. The females are very selective about what they want to do with their eggs. They're very selective about the males that they choose. So that means some of the males are going to miss out. That's part of it. That's nature's way of making sure the species stays strong. Now, those girls have laid their eggs, and what are they doing? Well, they're coming back off those beds. The males are going to stay. The males are going to be there when those eggs hatch, and the males are going to guard those fry. The girls, they're gone. Now, that means that your best chance, your most likely chance of catching your PB is before those females get on bed. you have to do it in the early spawn, and you've got to find them in the pockets, those spawning pockets, those spawning areas we've talked about before, those traditional areas of spawning, whether it's a hydrilla flat, whether it's a channel swing bank, whether it's a bluff wall that they like, or whatever. You have to find those particular areas where those bass like to spawn. Come back off of that, and I'm telling you, that's where those females a lot of times are going to be holed up waiting to move in. Now, during the pre-spawn, they're going to be closer into the bank because they're going to be following migration routes. But during the spawn, as the spawn starts to take effect, well, they might move around just a little bit, especially if that water offers different things in there. If there's some hydrilla or some flooded brush or a rock pile or whatever that they can relate to while they're waiting their turn, waiting for nature to tell them to move into those beds and select a mate. And then after they deposit their eggs, after they've chosen a male, deposited their eggs, and they're not going to be on bed very long at all. They're going to be moving back out into the waters where they came from. So that means your best chance to catch one of those big sow females, one of those great big girls, is obviously going to be in the earliest part of the spawn. You're not going to find them on bed. Now, you can try to target beds all day long because beds make an easy target, right? You can sight fish it, you can see it. Sometimes you see what you think is a great big fish. Problem is that water can distort your vision. Even with high dollar sunglasses on, water plays tricks on the eyes, and what you thought was a monster turns out to be a dink. Of course, the reverse is also true, but 9 times out of 10, and this is something that not only I've experienced, but something that I've seen other anglers go through as well, is that every time you try to pull a fish off a bed, you fight with it for an hour and you catch a dink. You catch that buck male. That female is gone. That female has already deposited her eggs and she's gone, or she was never there in the first place. So I would pull back into the pocket a little bit more, check the flat just a little bit more, pulling back away from where those bass have got their beds. And I'm telling you, that area is going to be stacked with bass. And here's the kicker. They are all going to be female, meaning they're going to be those bigger sized bass. Now, a lot of guys are going to be mad at me for giving up this trick. As a matter of fact, a pro angler buddy of mine, who I'm not going to mention, is already pretty heated at me for making this video, because when tournament season starts, you know, when the big tournaments for BASS and MLF, when all these tournaments start and they're fishing the spawn in various lakes around the country in the southern U.S., this is what they do. They know those big girls a lot of times are not going to be on bed. They're going to be just off of it. And it's one of the few times that you're going to get almost all females stacked in the same area together. So your fish sizes are going to be a lot bigger. And there's some pretty easy techniques that I use to go after them. First and foremost, well, again, no surprise to anyone, is I'm using a jig. This here is a Strike King Hack Attack fluoro jig. I mean, it's got a screw lock on here. It's got a little bit shorter shank. I really like that because I'm going to be coming through that vegetation. And today I've got a Rage Grub on it. That's what I used for today. And you can see that I've got it in line with the hook shank rather than perpendicular, because I was using it as a bluegill imitator today rather than as a craw. I mean, you can switch that trailer either way depending on what you want to imitate. And for me, I was going more bluegill, which is why I had the green, than I was using it for a crawl. And this jig right here, this thing gets me some really nice bites. I have gotten to where I really like this jig. That shorter shank, that thicker brush guard, and that rounded head with that line tie. See how that line tie is? I like a line tie like that because when you're fishing thick vegetation, when you're fishing thick milfoil, thick hydrilla, thick grass, or whatever, that's going to be a kicker. That's going to help it come through cleanly, because you might have a brush guard, but a lot of times that line tie and the angle of that brush guard is what's going to get you gummed up. Now, in timber, this doesn't do nearly as well as something like an Arky jig or like the Denny Brower casting jig that I showed before. But in grass and closer to a little bare bottom, a little hard bottom bank, this is going to work just fine. But there's also a faster retrieve that I like to use sometimes, and that is a bladed jig. This is a Berkley Slobber Knocker, but again, the brand does not matter. I just happen to like these because they're so different from every other type of bladed jig. And you can see, once again, no surprise to anyone, I've got a soft plastic jerkbait rigged as my trailer because I like how that slithers through the water, and it allows this chatterbait, it allows this bladed jig to have a great hunting action. And whenever I'm fishing for those females, the great thing about fishing for bass is they have a very competitive nature inside of them. If one bass is going to go after it, if there are other bass in the area, then they all have a need to attack it. As you guys saw whenever I was showing the pre-spawn fishing video, whenever I caught 2 fish at one cast on that walking bait. But it works for anything, right? Well, this has only got 1 hook, so it's only going to catch 1 fish that I'm aware of. But I like that soft jerkbait as it gives it that erratic action, and the way that I'm fishing this, lots of starts, lots of stops. I use a straight retrieve very rarely. A lot of times I might stroke it just like a jig. A lot of times I might pop it up, give it a few cranks, and then let it sit. I might do some, twitching to it, almost like I'm doing the Alabama shake, like I'm fishing a swim jig. All of those are great options, and they work extremely well. So something like this Berkley Slobber Knocker can be super effective, a bladed jig in general, whenever you pair it with the right trailer. You can see here that this is what I'm using when I'm basically imitating a shad. But I also have green ones, I have black ones that I like, but this one right here, this is what I'm trying to imitate a shad, and I'm working it around those shad balls. But a swim jig would be another great choice, worked in a similar way, especially if you're on a crowded and pressured fishery. But leading from that bladed jig, another one that I like to use, is a fluke style bait, a soft plastic jerkbait. This is a Strike King caffeine shad. It's got to be my all-around favorite soft plastic jerkbait just because of how, soft it is. I mean, if you look at this one here, this is the cream, right? And then you look at the Strike King, you look at the caffeine shad, you can see that it's a lot softer. Now, that doesn't make the cream one bad. It just has different applications. But whenever I'm doing something like this, and this I have rigged on a hover rig, but I've got it on there sideways. And if you're familiar with the channel at all, you know that this is how I like to fish a fluke on a hover rig, because that flat side, it causes it to be like a surfboard. It just gives it that extra glide. At least to me it does. It gives me the ability to fish this in different ways, and I can work it in different ways. I can pop it and let it sink, and then pop it and then let it sink. And I'm telling you what, this has caught me some really, really nice fish, especially when those females are backing off of bed. There are some pockets where I know of on the big lake where I can cast this reliably and catch some nice fish in the later part of the spawn. So that's what this does for me. A hover rig up shallow, people want to use them as a deep water bait, and they work exceptionally well as a deep water bait. But up shallow, under flooded brush, and this doesn't have a weed guard or anything on it. I've got an open hook and everything, and yet I'm still using this effectively in those areas. Now, I do have to go up under the bush and get it a few times. That's part of it. It's like using a wacky rig. But if you like fishing a hover rig with a soft plastic jerkbait with a fluke style bait, try turning it sideways. You'll be impressed with how much the action changes and how much more glide and twirl you'll get on the fall. But a soft plastic jerkbait is not the only thing that I like to fish a little bit differently on a hover rig. Another one that I like to do, good old Senko, good old 5-inch plastic worm, a stick bait. And this on a hover rig can be exceptionally effective, again, as those females are moving off bed. And for those of you who were here last year, you might remember that I was able to, with a hover rig and a soft plastic stick bait, pull a 7+ pound female out from under flooded brush. And she took my little plastic boat for a good long ride. And I'm telling you what, that fish was a lot of fun to catch, especially given the fact that I was fishing this on a light setup with a spinning rod and only light line, so I had to be extra ginger. That bass took me for a good long ride, and she was gorgeous, she was beautiful, and she was right exactly where she needed to be. She was moving back off a bed after she deposited her eggs, and that's where I found her. So that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make here, is that you don't have to go fishing beds if you want to get those huge big bass. Now, I don't really endorse fishing beds. If you are going to be fishing beds, then do it with some caution and some care and some respect. Put those bass back on bed. Don't take them, don't put them in your live well, don't take a picture with them. Catch them, release them as fast as you can. As a matter of fact, act like it's a race to see how fast you can get that bass back in the water, because every second that bass is away from the bed, you're going to have bluegill, minnow, shiner, shad. All of them are going to be pecking at those eggs, which means there's going to be fewer bass for you to catch because, well, you pulled the guardian off of the bed. So think about that. But anyway, when it comes to searching for those females, those big sow females, like I said, in the early part of the spawn, look just off of that spawning bed. Look just back from it, and you're going to find that those females have grouped up. A lot of them are going to be grouped up in those areas before they move in. Now, when the post-spawn comes through, or those girls have laid their eggs and they're moving out, you can find them again in a lot of the same areas as they're moving out, and they want to have a rest as they get ready to head back out to the main lake to begin their spring and summer patterns. It's not that hard to do, and it's a place that I've had a lot of great success. And like I said, a few of my pro buddies are going to be very mad at me when this video drops. So think about that. It's a very highly effective way for you to catch those really big girls, and you won't have to pressure those beds to do it. So there you have it. My favorite way to catch those really big bass in the early spawn and in the late spawn. It's not really hard to do. Especially, you can look in the same place both times. You're going to find those females congregating, and they will be willing to eat, especially after they deposited their eggs. And you can catch, well, you can catch your PB, if not for the year, then maybe the biggest bass you've ever caught. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.